In this episode, we talk about the concept of immortality, what it truly means to live forever, and how that affects the development of your characters in your story.
And for today's prompt, Dante got me describing a immortal life suddenly turned mortal.
All that and more on this episode of Your Rivers Are Wrong. Stay tuned. Good morning, or evening, or afternoon, whenever you may be. Welcome back to the Your Rivers Are Wrong podcast. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Dante.
And I'm the other host. My name is Merle.
And we're here, as we are every week, to talk about the wonderful whimsies of world building, the arts and aesthetics of setting up a setting, and telling stories born from it.
Yeah.
We're on episode 83. I feel like that's really high. The number continues to surprise me.
I feel like we say that every time. But I mean, I guess it is true for every episode we record. Like, it is the highest one so far every time.
Wouldn't you believe it?
Yeah.
The newest episode is always the newest, highest number.
How magic.
Yeah. I've been recovering from the whole eye surgery thing, and I haven't quite found my groove yet. Like, I haven't gotten into like a good solid week of just, hey, these are 5 normal days, you know?
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, also, if you're in recovery, it feels like, when is that over, right? Like, when does it mean like you should feel bad about not doing anything anymore, you know?
I think I'm in that phase of like, is this the new normal? I remember waking up.
Oh, wow.
I remember waking up like it was yesterday, when in fact it was today. I woke up and my eyes were blurry, and I'm like,
Oh, God.
is this something that people with decent vision always experience? Or is this just me with like newly fixed eyes? Where does that fall in like the spectrum of like people who can actually see?
Yeah, good question. Got no idea.
People don't usually wake up with blurry eyes. I'm learning. I think the first few months after eye surgery, you have like a period where your eyes are very dry. So when you wake up, they're like begging for water.
Crusty. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
That's the blurriness that I'm like getting used to.
I mean, it's not too long ago. It makes sense that you're still a bit wobbly about it. That's okay.
Yeah.
You're allowed to have rest after a surgery. That's okay.
This is true.
I'm pretty good. I'm actually more than pretty good. I'm actually pretty good. Yeah. I had, I love how I just said the same thing anyway.
I'm not just pretty good.
I'm pretty good. Yeah, exactly. It's the vocal inflection, you know, that makes all the difference. I had a very exciting audition on Wednesday, which is 2 days ago, for a new show that's been going on, or will go on in the future, in the very near future, a local musical theater show. And for the people who have been listening for a while, they know I love theater. I'm a theater nerd. I love doing theater. And there's finally some theater around, and it made me very happy to do it. So that's very exciting. So I probably will hear in the coming 2 days if I got in. Fingers crossed.
Oh, 2 days? Oh,
yes.
wow.
Yeah, it's very exciting because I think they still have like a second round of auditions on Saturday, which is tomorrow. Then afterwards, they're probably going to like figure their shit out and puzzle until the people fit to the characters and stuff. Yeah, so probably Sunday, maybe Monday.
That's
probably
awesome.
Sunday. Yeah, it's very exciting. And it just made me very happy because there were like a lot of people either know or just know by face from other stuff that's been local productions that I haven't been a part of but have just seen or stuff, you know. And it's just so lovely to be with people that like theater so much, and it's been a while. So that made me very, very happy, which is important.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's so cool to start like recognizing names and faces and understand like, oh, this is this person from this work. Do you ever like have that moment where you're like sitting in a crowd of talented people and you're like, oh, I've heard of this person. Oh, I know of this person through like either friends of friends or peers of peers.
Oh,
and, like,
yeah.
It's almost as if like the circle's getting smaller.
Yeah, for sure. And also because people find the same kind of stuff, right? Like if I see someone in a production that I think is really talented or skilled and I love the production, usually I like the stuff that I would want to be in anyway, right? So if I would audition for a new thing that I like, pretty big chance that the people similar to this kind of productions would show up, right? And because it's so local here, it is kind of the same people that are coming to these auditions based on literally just where they live. It also is very nice because it's very feels very much like a community if you start to sort of understand who goes where or what kind of stuff people like or what they're good at or whether they just come or not, to an audition or to a show. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's very nice. It just made me happy. Oh my God. It's also just nice because I just love, I mean, I told you this before, but I just love to just do something without work related. Like, I don't need to make money of this shit. It's just for me. It's literally so egocentric and it's great.
Listen, I've poured so many hours into passion projects that no one will care about.
Exactly. Yes.
And I will never profit. I'll never see a dime. And no one will ever congratulate me for finishing it. It's just for me, like for my heart.
It just frees up the soul, like if nothing else, you literally can only do it for fun because there's nothing else coming out of it. So that's great. It's very freeing in a sort of ironic way. Yeah, so that's nice. I'm just so looking forward to it.
I'm so curious. Have you ever had a situation where like your reputation preceded you? People know you, like, know of you, or like recognize you.
Theater specific or anything?
I mean, anything. Has someone been like, oh, you're Merla. I think I've heard of you in this project or in this space.
Well, never that like literally, wow, you're famous kind of, thank God, because I would be so awkward. I think I would sort of die a little bit on the spot if that ever happened to me. When people have seen like either my Instagram or, because I do a lot of different kind of stuff. So people know me from either, for instance, like the theater or the singing, or people know me from the visual, the illustrations, or people know me from work kind of related stuff, which is more organizing, curating kind of stuff. But very often they don't really interact with me in the other bubble. So if they don't know that I'm also a singer, then they're super shocked when they find out that I can sing. Or when they don't know that I can draw, then they're super shocked to find out that I can draw. So the cross or how do you say that? Like the
crossing of streams.
Yeah, crossing of streams is what happens to me quite a lot because I'm just in different fields for like the full week. Like there's like a one day where I do every day I do a different thing. So yeah, that's kind of funny because then they're like, wait, this is also what you do? Oh, how did I never know about this? And I'm like, yeah, because you just don't interact with me that way. But nothing too crazy, thank God, because I don't have the personality to be famous. I wouldn't be able to do it or want it. I don't think it's very fun to be famous. Did you ever have it? You're doing a lot too.
I mean, I've had people recognize me for my YouTube stuff before. I remember I had this phase where I had like back to back really popular Reddit posts about my YouTube videos.
Oh,
back when I was doing League of Legends stuff.
Yeah. You were a big player. That was so cool.
Like 10 years ago, but
different life,
Yeah, different. I call it like past life when there was a passion project I was really involved in.
Quarter life crisis or something. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, and people are like, "You did that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I did that. I got over it though."
I got over it.
But like, what I remember, like, I logged into a game with my friends, and the enemy team was like, "Oh, you're this guy from this video, aren't you?" And I'm like, I don't even know where you're from. How do you know me? Like,
wow, that's so cool. Fun. Oh, that's
like,
great.
That's small the world is. When I went to PAX Unplugged, the convention here near Pennsylvania, like there were a bunch of people who recognized my channel when I like introduced myself. They're like, "Oh, you're that guy with the dragon thing," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's me."
Fun.
Me.
That's so great. Really I do love that for you. That's great because it is what you want, ideally, right? That people got you in the back of their brain somehow. I
think that's really neat.
That is the goal a little bit. Yeah,
it doesn't like earn me anything except for like
appreciation
points.
And self-love. Yeah.
Anyway. Speaking of spending a lot of time on things, we got to dive into today. What was that sound?
I don't know. I was trying to do it. Move on.
Is that our transition sound? Is that what
I wanted to do like a like that, but it's failed because my brain wasn't there yet.
You went to wee.
Now it's just a wee.
Okay.
Continue.
Anyway, on a normal episode when we don't have those transition sounds, we talk about one topic relating to world building or storytelling that we just find really, really interesting. And we break it down. We're not always experts on the topic. It's something usually we just find really intriguing about the space. And we try to break it down best we can based on the experiences and the things that we have read and witnessed and seen in media. And after we talk about that topic, we usually present a prompt about it, like a improvised prompt that we toss from one to the other that we try to make up on the spot based on what we know and what we've learned and things like that.
Yeah.
So today is a topic I feel like we've definitely touched upon after 83 episodes. I feel like we've touched on a lot of topics.
It's maybe hard to not touch upon anything anymore. Yeah.
I really should have searched through if we did this topic already because it really feels real familiar. But today we are talking about immortality.
Ooh.
We're talking about immortality.
Nice.
The idea of a timeless person, what that means, what that entails, and what kind of stories spawn from it. I was first not first, but very in the past year, I found it so interesting that there were two shows out at the same time that everyone really liked that had one kind of similar thing in common. They had an elf in the storyline who simply lived for a very long time. For people who in the anime sphere, you guys probably know I'm talking about Dungeon Meshi. I'm talking about Marcille in that story, where she is several centuries older than everybody else. And I'm also talking about Freyren, which follows the story of an elf who is seemingly ageless and approaches life from a completely different angle. Now, I feel like I have been, in the past couple weeks and months, just flanked by stories about these immortal people, simply surrounded by the idea of a timeless person and how they handle that life. Most recently, I and Marla have been really involved in the Epic the Musical fandom.
Yes.
And how the main character just reckons with gods and the simple fact that you cannot kill them. So what do? There are many stories told from the beginning of time. As long as deities has been a concept, immortality has also been a concept. I recently watched the episode from the Overly Sarcastic Productions, OSP, Red and Blue on YouTube. They talked about immortals as a concept, and it just got my brain spinning of like, oh, there are a lot of stories about immortality, the concept of immortal characters and their role in these stories, which is always so interesting because you can't quite approach them the same way you can everybody else. So I wanted to touch upon some core tenets of these characters. I wanted to touch upon when you should appropriately use them, and I guess maybe just our favorite ways that stories have portrayed immortal characters and how they are unique to the characters more commonly presented in literature and media. Do you have any initial thoughts on this topic before we jump into it?
Woof. It's a big one. I feel like we haven't done it before, but I feel like we've touched upon it in terms of like episodes of vampires and gods and that kind of stuff, but never literally, I think. So that's nice. I have to say, I was also, by the way, completely unfamiliar with both of those, like reference to the series you mentioned. I mean, I think you mentioned Dungeon Meshi before, but I haven't come around to watch it, even though it looks super fun. I've seen like some screenshots and shit, and I'm like, dang, this sounds kind of up my alley. So I should find the time to do it. Honestly, immediately I had to think about the series Gravity Falls. It's a cartoon series where there's one character, I guess spoilers, but also it's just very good, even if you know it. So just go watch it.
Sure.
There's basically a lot of supernatural phenomena in the lives of the two main characters who are twins and sort of having an adventurous summer with their uncle in a sort of woodsy village. And one of the characters that they eventually meet, which turns out to be the sort of main villain of the story, is called Bill Cipher. And he comes to them in a sort of con man, deal maker, kind of, dealer of cards personality, very casual, but also very crazy, powerful, and terrifying. And I had to think of him because he is a very unique kind of quote unquote god, right? I don't know if they ever call him a god. I don't know if I would describe him as a god, but the way that he presents is very, I can do everything, but I'm just too bored to. Or I just like you enough for now to just not care and just be a simple character looking a certain way. But he is eternal and impossible to catch and, shapeless, basically. All that very abstract stuff, right? And for me, immortality touches upon the same thing. It's a very abstract, obviously impossible, but abstract thing to have as a character trait, right? Like, how do you characterize as the author or as the creator of a character like this? How do you characterize someone who has literally endless experience,
right?
Or has literally never aged? Because there's also differences, right? There's either when you never age, or there's stuff where you're like stuck in time, or there's all a la, Groundhog Day versus indeed what you were saying, like elves that live forever and have like seen societies fall apart and be reborn and all that crazy stuff that's usually way too big for like human brains, right? To even comprehend. Like in the real world, we're already struggling to realize the impact of, whatever, climate change or like big stuff like that. That's hard to grasp in a limited lifespan like we have. So if you're immortal, can you deal with this? Or is this like breaking you up? Is this something that your mind changes and, adapts to over time? Like, how does that even work? There's a lot of factors that are at play when you decide to either throw in a character like this, or when you decide that someone is living forever or is living for a crazy long time. And if that's endless, like, what does that do to a personality, but also to their relationships and to like their sense of time even? Because if someone is, living from day to day, like that's going to be a crazy long life. Like, do people like not even care about the daily stuff anymore? Or, are they in slumber because they're just so bored about the endless time they have? I don't know. Like, is this a hibernating thing that happens now? I don't know. There's a lot of crazy ways you can go. And yeah, it's very interesting because it ties into religion as well and like how people perceive someone like that. It's not just like what it does for the character, but it's very much also how the world around is perceiving it or is, experiencing this, I guess, like
from like a witness point of view.
Yeah, almost witness, or also like sometimes it's a secret, right? Where someone is not telling or not knowing maybe because it is not visible, or if it's like a Groundhog Day kind of thing, people just are stuck in their own loop and they're not realizing there's something bigger going on, or it's something like I don't age, so I vampire style, I sort of change places every now and then or cut ties with people to make sure that it's not obvious. Or it's someone who does live forever and becomes either a god or a villain or like someone very mythical, right? There's so many angles to this. It's great topic.
Yeah, I think just from the very top, immortality seems like a pretty darn simple concept. You simply do not die, by definition.
Yes.
You do not die, right? But when you break it down into how many times it's been used in literature, there's so many different ways immortality has been used. There's so many variations. There's the process of becoming immortal, like previously being a mortal person and then becoming immortal. One of my first ever experiences with like immortality in media is a book called Tuck Everlasting. I don't know if that's something you were mandated to read back in school, but
or I've heard of this, but I think I've heard of like a musical version of this. I think I've seen like a trailer or something. Is this like a classic book?
It's pretty old.
I think so, right?
Minimum 20 years old. Certainly. It's been around since my grade school.
Right.
So basically the whole concept was that a family is kind of due to what they did, like something that they did, they gained everlasting life at whatever age they were at. There's the variation of like you simply don't age, but you are killable.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of like eternal youth versus invincibility. In Tuck Everlasting, they were very specifically immortal, invincible. So they could not die, even if they wanted to. So that becomes quite an isolating experience because, as the OSP episode that I watched very aptly put it, mortality is the universal human experience.
Oh, dang. Yeah.
All of us, guaranteed, without a doubt, will experience
have in common. Yeah.
The process of time passing. And when you divorce yourself from that idea of time passing, are you truly human? Can you connect from that point forward? Like there's the angle that you are born immortal. You have always been immortal, and therefore you have never been able to connect to the human experience. But for people who become immortal, who suddenly lose the ability to die, it is a severe disconnect in how you perceive the world and how you relate to other people. Watching the video is very existential because it deals with these questions of like,
I can imagine, yeah,
of the motivation of the human spirit, why we do things. And this was actually something highlighted in D&D 5th edition. It's like what actually makes humans exceptional in a world with dwarves and elves and all that and all these mythical races.
Yeah.
Why are humans exceptional? And the long-lived races always loved looking at humans because they recognized quickly that they only have so many years and thus have this unnatural urge to achieve and become and attain, right?
Yeah, there's this rush to it, like the urgency of it. That's very well put.
There's like a spirit of advancement. There's a passion of a craft that is fleeting, as is life. So when you look at that as a concept and then address immortality, which sounds, on paper, super cool, suddenly you don't have to fear death. The fear of death doesn't just paralyze people. It also gives people the onus to move and do and become. When you have these incredibly long lives, or more importantly, you exist alongside people who have mortality, who will not last forever like you do, how do you take it? How do you handle it? What do you become as these people begin to move and phase out of your life? And that disconnect is where all these stories kind of come to life, so to speak.
Yeah.
I've always found it interesting to look at, especially in my years playing D&D, I've played a good handful of elves, mostly because I just wanted to understand what it's like to look at the world with this idea of longevity, that everything happening right now is simply a moment that will pass in your very, very long life. So how important is it truly? And I was so touched to see those topics touched on in Dungeon Meshi and Freyren because it's something that I've always pondered on. if you simply have a different timeline of your life versus everybody around you, how do you perceive the world in a different light? How does the world change in your eyes?
Yeah. This also reminds me immediately of the episode we did, I think a while back. I have no idea what season this was, but we talked a lot about the difference in size. And I think it was like an episode about giants or about like scale or something. And there was this idea that we sort of threw back and forth a little bit where it's like, whose perspective are you watching from, right? And in that episode, it was, of course, about like literal size of things or beings or whatever. But it's the same holds up for timelines. So if there's two characters and they're both, let's say, for, simplicity's sake, they're equally important to the story. They're just the two, the two happy main characters, If one of them lives 1,000 years plus or infinite years and one of them has a regular life of maybe living up to 70, 80, whatever, depending on who we're following, our view from the world will most likely change. And because we are, as like real life people or readers or, audience, are of course linked to the person who is closest to us, which is in this case the regular timeline character. But if we want to change the perspective, you can sort of find the strangeness in our regular life, by which I mean, if you look from the eyes of the immortal person in the room, everyone is literally like fading away more quickly than they can even, have thoughts. Like, what if it's a slowness to it, right? Like if you have like either a smaller brain or, this is very random example, but because you have so many years, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a certain slowness to your way of living now, because there's literally endless time. You don't have to run anywhere. You don't have to make connections that will last or are important enough to still have around in 2 years. No, it really doesn't matter. So if that's the way your perception of the world is, if you have endless time, for instance, then everyone else around you is going to be the most busy person in the world. If we are in a society where everyone has endless life, then if one person comes in that literally might die in a second, they're going to be like the busiest, most annoying, frantic person in the room.
Exactly.
But if you watch that from a human perspective, everyone else around you is just completely bored and slow about it. Yeah, I'm putting it a bit weird, but you know what I mean, right? Like, depending on where you're looking at, it's really changing the way you view the world and whether the world is made for you or not. Because, of course, this is also what happens, again, I keep coming back to this. If we look at real life versions of this, like a planet has a very long life. It's literally outlived so many species, including ourselves. We've just only been here for a while. But then if we look at something like the timeline of the Earth or a timeline of whatever, an imaginary planet, doesn't matter. It's a whole different outlook, because then we're just like part of a phase, Whereas if we look from human perspective, we are the phase, like the world is the phase.
Right.
And I think the same counts for timelines like that. And I think it's a very interesting way to look at it, because it's also either like, in the case of fantasy, of course, are you focusing or wrapping your world around the worldview of immortality, or are you wrapping your world around another perspective? And then based on that, also your characters will either be outcasts or they'll be, regulars. And that also changes the game, because even if you're a regular, quote unquote, immortal person, you can still be chill about it. But if you're an outcast immortal person, it will bring up all this sort of stuff of, wow, I'm so different to everything else that's happening. And that's a whole different ballgame. So yeah, it's a very relevant question, I think.
I think it's a great comparison just to understand like the mindset of an immortal. When you are at work and something happens and you'd process the option to like live in the moment and have it really be like a happy, exciting moment, or simply to exist through it. No matter what, the day will be over and there will be another day after it. Now imagine that work day is 10 years, right?
Yes.
In the same energy that we sometimes just kind of walk through life with no emotion or simply just apathetic to it, if you stretch that in scale to someone who lives eternally, it's very easy for them to have this sort of apathy with time passing because there truly is no rush. Yeah. I think like in my 20s, which I only recently got out of, I'm not ancient, but like there's this concept where you only have so much time in your 20s to be someone and do something.
Yeah,
right?
It's this limited like, oh God, your youth will end soon. Yeah.
It's this little window, right? So you try to do as much as you can. You try to attain as much as you can. You live life best you can. What if someone truly just didn't have that pressure? Their 20s would last truly as long as they wanted to. And then when they're bored with their 20s, they move on, if they can do that. How does that change the perspective of a character? How does it change their motivations? It's much harder to motivate an immortal being than it is someone who simply just doesn't have time to lay around and not
to ponder. Yeah.
To not be. Right.
Yeah.
Another fantastic line from the OSP episode was, an immortal is a fixed point in a moving world. At what point?
That's a great line.
Like just great, amazing, fantastic drops of knowledge.
Yeah.
Right.
So good.
At what point does an immortal simply become of the world? Right. In the same way that mountains and rivers and caverns and things like that. In the same way that the sun rises and sets, simply a part of the setting. How different is an immortal from something like that? In the concept that they will not change over time. They will truly be static. So the world will move on without them and progress without them. So how do you make that a character that can grow?
Yeah.
If growth is so heavily tied to aging and progressing, how do you add a character to your story with that trait, with that characteristic? It's why stories are often about achieving immortality and not about having
the actual life of it. Yeah. Wow, that's great. That's great.
The pursuit of the fountain of youth, the chase of the philosopher's stone, like all of these things to prolong life or revive life or bring back life, to preserve life and keep it.
I mean, that's so typical, right? That example of like, it's always about the chase of it, because of course that's the whole human experience, is chasing stuff before you die, like achieving stuff before it's over. So if the whole, like, of course it's a sort of mythical thing to want more life, because that is what we're running out of constantly, which is kind of the point of the chase. But then once you have it, the point is kind of defeated. So of course all the stories end there. Like, what do you do after? Like, it's not a way of life that we understand, or that we would be able to wrap our mind around, or be like content with, maybe even. Like, what do you do if you don't have to chase anymore? If you actually drank the water from the fountain, you know? It's a very hard thing to grasp, because it's very quickly also turning into something like, when does something become mythical or become a god? Or when do we perceive something as different from us? Like, is a river different from us? Is a god different from us? Is, a child different from us? Like, where's the line there? Or an animal, they also have different lifespans. Some turtles live up to 200 years or something. That's crazy. But we don't worship them. Like, how does that work? It's so complex.
And to include that into your story is to make it an integral part of like your world building.
Yeah.
As you said before, with like experiencing time on a different scale, there's a whole episode in Feren of the main character, who's an elf who's lived for hundreds of years. She spends 6 months looking for a flower, and her human friends are like, what are we doing? There's so much to do.
Right.
Like, you are so smart, so talented, you know so much. Why so many months on just a flower for one garden, right? What is the point? And in the elf's mindset, it's like, why not?
Yeah.
Like,
what
when you're not pressed for
long?
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, if you want to go do something else, you can. But this is what I want to do for the next 6 months, and I'm going to do it because I'm not being pressed to do anything else. That's just like her joy.
Yeah.
That's simply who she is.
It's also fascinating to me how it influences the relationship between characters, right? Because it's one thing to make an immortal character, but as soon as they make connections to the world, that usually in stories with immortal characters is not filled with immortal characters. Maybe also immoral. I don't know your story, but usually they're the exception, right? If they become the bestest of friends, or if they find a lover that is a human or a regular timelined being, a short-lived person compared to them,
right? How
do you make that a relationship that's so important that it's worth pursuing? Because if you have endless time, there will be others. They will never outlive you ever. So they'll always at some point die away, and then you got to move on.
Right.
And that's kind of how that works. So if you want something that is important to this person, it needs to be so important that it has to basically stand the test of time. That's kind of what it is then, right? So how do you do that? Or how do you make someone deal with that loss if they know so much loss like that compared to their endlessness?
Yeah.
Because they will have every relation ever live shorter than them. So at some point, if they find a lover that is the new interesting thing, if it's a unique new experience to have a relationship with a person in their X amount of year, like they've had so many relationships before. It's literally endless. We've established this. If there's a new relationship that means so much more to them than the previous ones, eventually they will still have to deal with the grief of that. And they've done that 1,000 times before. So how do you make that a different kind of longing or a different kind of grief? What do they bring that is surprising to someone who's lived literally so long to see it all? That's very interesting to me as well.
The romance fiction of Eternals falling in love is so, for me, difficult to believe, right? Because
it's a hard sell, I gotta say. Yeah, it's true.
I could not imagine like being with someone who has had like hundreds of years of people before me.
Yeah.
Right. What an incredibly high bar to exist next to.
Yeah.
Right. It's simply everyone in time ever. Right. If I'm competing against somebody from the 1600s.
Yep.
I feel like there's no way I could ever like quite. I don't know. That just seems impossible to me.
Your brain just shortcutted out of there.
That's just a skill difference. Maybe I just can't imagine it. But
I mean, that's why it's hard, right? Like that's what you got to figure out if you want to try something like this. It's a hard question. Yeah.
It's a question of if you want to include an immortal in your story, like what is their onus for action? Like what motivates them? What moves them forward? Mm-hmm. Do they still find joy in life? Have they been jaded by it? And like, how do you make sure that what is happening is important enough for them to act? Because time, or simply the pressure of time, is such a moving force for most people in this life. And we barely process that that's a thing until it becomes very evident that we don't have much time to act. And that's when we suddenly have this human experience of rushing towards this finish line.
Yeah.
And that's what I got on Immortality.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
Got me thinking. Ooh.
Simply existential morning thoughts. Definitely.
The usual.
Yeah. So with that, I want to toss to you just a little bit of a prompt.
Yeah, it's what we do.
Along the same lines of what we've been talking about for the past half hour, I want you to. Are you ready? I'm sorry, I forgot to ask. You're ready? You can say no, and then
ready.
we can ramble for a little bit longer.
No,
we can totally just talk about something else.
You got the brain cells working here. So yeah, let's go for it.
Stellar. Okay, you are immortal.
Immortal or immortal?
Immortal.
Important distinction. Okay.
You are immortal.
Yes.
Until yesterday. How do you spend the first day of your mortal life?
Oh, wow. Ooh, this is a good one. Can I just make up anything else about it? Or is there like rules to this specific immortality we're talking about?
You were once immortal, now you're not. That's all that matters.
I love the complete vagueness of this. Okay. You can go many ways with this, right? I'll just share a little bit of thoughts before. Because I feel like it's also interesting to like, does it do something physically to your body, right? If you're suddenly like, but I don't want to go like, oh my God, I instantly fade away because my bones are too dry.
Turned to dust.
Yeah, that's going to end this prompt very quickly.
And you spend your first day, well, as a pile of dust.
Dead. Yeah, that's kind of the point. Yeah. Because if I got like 100,000 million years under my belt, like, I don't know how my body's still happening. That must be some kind of crazy magic going on. But no, let's not do that because that will be very, very quick and merciful, I guess. Okay. I'm going to lean into the magic of it a little bit just to make it interesting.
Sure.
I think we're looking at a person who's grown up within godhood. I would say within this world that I'm establishing right now, I guess. There's kind of a two-faceted world. On one side, the immortals or people with a slower timeline that will look beyond the boundary of death because they don't have that boundary. Mm-hmm. It is still like a family-based, like there's more people like this. They're pretty rare, but they exist. It's almost like a species. And then there's the more traditional human world that looks upon these beings as almost like strange sort of nature gods or something, like the few from the mountain that just keep roaming and that everyone has seen for generations. That's kind of the feel of this. Now, I would say these species usually, or these two groups usually don't interact at all because they're just so different from each other because of basically all the reasons we've described before. Like they're just too different in terms of like what they care for, how they deal with temporariness, because some have it and some really don't have it. There's differences in whether you can trust someone like this, because if they don't care for you because you will die away at some point anyway, they're not going to really take care of you in a relationship usually. Like any kind of relationship, friendships, even like, just caring is a different thing if you're immortal. But then there's one character, which is our main character, that is more curious about the world they live in and wants to breach the distance from the place that is basically their home and the people that also live in it, even though they're not the same. I would say it's a little bit of a love story.
Okay.
Where one of the humans at some point, maybe by accident, maybe by having a sort of, it can be actually a literal accident where maybe they just sort of got stuck between a sort of crack in the mountains and they had no way of getting out except for one roaming mountain spirit that just happened to be there because they're always there. It's what they do. Okay. I think there's a very beautiful sort of inner monologue kind of thing where it's like, do I help this person? I know that everyone that is like me would not, because it literally doesn't matter. It's going to be like an expectation that won't be fulfilled. It's going to spend my time, which I have, but then they're caring about me and they're dead and then I have to move on. All these things are sort of happening with decision making like this, but eventually they decide to help out anyway. And a very careful relationship starts blossoming with so many notes and confusion and questions attached to it, because it is not something they're kind of allowed or taught to do at all. They both know the implications of it, and they both know that it is a temporary thing that requires a lot of work from both of them. But eventually they do find it worth it, because they suddenly realize through interacting with each other, but also interacting with a person that thinks differently, literally, that care can exist with multiple mindsets, and it might look different, but the in-between of that is still very beautiful and sort of rare, specifically because they have it, and worth pursuing, even if it is for a short time for one of them. I think eventually they lean into it a little bit, or so much that it is becoming a problem, the traditional age-old problem, in fact, of having to let go where you shouldn't let go. It is almost a question of, specifically for the immortal character, are you willing to give up that thing that is the most familiar to you, which is our timeline, our way of life, for something so unknown and fleeting that literally you sort of shorten your lifespan for forever, that literally will make you only live maybe 50 years, maybe 10 years more, and that's it. And is that worth giving up all the other experiences ever you can have? And where previously they probably would have said no, this time is different. And they decide that it is worth it, and it is worth pursuing, even if it literally kills them and ends their way of life in this world. I would say it is a sort of trade-off at, I'm just describing because I'm not sure if I'm no in the improv mood today, but it happens sometimes. But I'm feeling like a sort of ultimate challenge, right? Where eventually it's like you either choose for your old life or you choose for a fleeting new life. And what does that look like? After the most daunting scene in the world, where the immortal character feels literally a sort of rush of time happen to them, a panic to make this decision, which is something that never happened to them before. There's never a urgency to any decisions they make. But if they want this, they have to make the decision now, because before they know it, their lover will be gone. So if you don't make the decision now, it's not going to happen. So for the first time, even in their eternal life, they feel the urgency, and the urgency is a feeling so rare and so beautiful to them that it instantly sort of convinces them to make that decision. Because if that's the feeling that you get from a temporary life, it is a feeling of great relevance and a feeling of feeling awake and feeling needed and wanting to make an impact, a feeling of, not panic, but like, the temporariness is tangible. And that's something very rare and beautiful, and eventually decides, or makes them decide, to give up their old life. I would say, in the same vein, their first day as a mortal being will be a little bit, Ariel style, where it's like, oh my God, I got legs. What do I do with them now? I think this first scene is almost like a sort of childlike wonder that an age-old being has. And what does that even look like, right? It's the sort of vibrancy of experiencing with a new body almost, because it is kind of like that. Like, if I would say, even in a sort of physical way, the way things feel is different. The way things smell is different. The way that you can suddenly enjoy a sound that is very usual or regular, because it is something that's beautiful and wants to be admired before it's gone, because you have limited amount of them. There's only so much years that you can fill with perception like this, and it's not something that's part of your literally everyday eternal life. So I would say this character is actually very happy because of it. And I think if we fast forward for a final scene, there is one scene where I think our main, ex-immortal character has to experience... it would be interesting if the final moments between these characters is actually the fact that their lover still dies first.
Mm-hmm.
And that even though it's not something they could have planned or something they ideally would have done short after each other, the grief is suddenly something very new and raw, because it is something that feels very different from the grief that an eternal being has, because that's a fleeting thing. It's always going to be replaced by something else. And now there's only limited years where you just don't have the thing that you cared for in your entire world. It's literally what you gave up for, what you gave up everything for. Yeah, there you go.
Right.
It's suddenly so painful, and it's so real, and it's so hurtful and upsetting and frustrating. And all of a sudden, even those feelings feel like they're right, because it feels like there's an urgency to the fact that living is now a different kind of living because the lover's not there anymore. And I don't know. I think that's all I got. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just the idea that everything is more vivid. Just the happiness from the first date to the grief at the very end. There's like a color tint that accents
that's
the emotion due to the time crunch. Since you don't have so much time to process something, it's almost as if you're rushing the emotion of it to experience it as fast as possible. Like kind of compress what you would normally spend a month or a year experiencing into a moment or a second.
And I think it's like, also, exactly what you're saying. Like if I was thinking a little bit on the idea of if you have a soundscape and you sort of stretch out the whole thing, you suddenly start noticing all the little bits of strange sort of sounds that are too fast if you just feel them regularly. Or if you see something in slow motion, all of a sudden it's so much more impactful because you have time to sort of experience all the parts of it and not just one thing. And I think if things go so fast or constantly fade away the way that an eternal life would sort of look upon the world, you're not going to see all the nuances of it because you're already gone. You're already not caring enough about it to still investigate it. And I think it would be different if you suddenly then fall into the perspective of having that attention to, I guess, detail and to the smaller things. It's pretty hard though. It's a hard prompt because you can go so many ways. So a more descriptive one today, but still nice. Very nice.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's a good way to close it. That's a fantastic way to just not necessarily close the topic, but simply to recognize how vast it is, right? How much there is to process.
There's a lot to this one. Yeah.
As with every episode, we don't really have much time to do that.
Nope.
To really just ponder on the
Limited
ideas
time.
of
We're
infinity.
humans after all.
So we're going to let you get back to your life. As we close out on this episode, we always encourage you to check us out on our Twitter, YRAW podcast. We also have a Gmail where you can reach us, yourriversarewrong@gmail.com. That's yourriversarewrong@gmail.com. And of course, as you continue to tell these stories and find more and more interesting characters to flavor your journey with all these ideas of time and immortality and the concept of simply existing as a universal human experience, always remember that amidst that, right beside it,
aside from the existentialism,
just a ways over, there's also the very true, always true concept that your rivers are wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
When everything else fades away, you still got this one truth. The very truthful thing that we keep holding on to.
And that's it.
I love it.
See you guys next time.
That's the end.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Rivers Are Wrong. If you have ideas for topics, prompts, or you just want to share your thoughts, please reach us at yourriversarewrong@gmail.com. That's yourriversarewrong@gmail.com. Also, a big thanks to Maarten Schellekens, who created the intro and outro music for our podcast. And most importantly, thank you for listening. We hope to see you at the next one. Bye.